Welcome F11 members to the latest in our Fundamentals of Post-Production video tutorials for issue 19, June 2013. Now it was suggested to me by one of you F11 members that I'd run through the post-production workflow on infrared shoot, which seemed to tie in brilliantly with the accompanying Seeing the Light feature in this issue of the e-zine. So that's what we're going to do. Here we have a shoot on Exmore straight out of the camera, and essentially I've got to select which pictures I'm going to use. And the thing with infrared is it's quite difficult to see what you've got. The image looks red, it also looks very lacking in contrast. So the first thing I'm going to do is just select one of those images and apply some adjustments so that to all of the pictures, so that I can edit easier, I can assess easier what I've got. So I'm just going to go select one and in Develop desaturate the image to turn it black and white, and with the tone curve just select the default setting, strong contrast. Infrared images are essentially quite flat, low contrast, so these adjustments, by the way, are not going to be the end product. They're just helping me choose the winner. So now I go back into library mode and select those images. Go back to develop, and if I now hit synchronize, it will apply those adjustments to all the images. There it goes, and I can start to see much better what I've got. And I've already been through these pictures, and I've flagged this one here for further attention. This is the one I'm going to work on now. So let's go into the develop mode. First of all, I've put in my caption information here, of course, so that's already in all the images. So now I'm going to look at the image and start to apply the real fine-tuning of adjustments. Look at the histogram. The first thing we come to, again, there's my exposure information, ISO 200, 63mm focal length using the 24 to 70 mid-range zoom. It was very windy, so I used quite a fast shutter speed. Okay, so we're not obviously concerned at all with the with the color temperature of the image, as we've already desaturated it. I'm now going to come down, and as with all pictures, the first thing I'm going to adjust is the tone of the histogram, the blacks and the whites. At the moment in this image, the darkest part of the image is not a black, it's a sort of muddy grey. So we need to take care of that, and the first thing I do is just move the black slider across to the left until this indicator up here starts telling me I'm clipping shadows. Come back a touch and do the same with the whites. Now it's a strange thing that it's virtually impossible to clip whites, but I've moved that tone across to the right, and that has improved my contrast already immeasurably. Just going to fine-tune those blacks there. Now at the moment that's enhanced the contrast a touch, but it's also given me an image which is much too bright. So I'm now going to come down to the tone curve, take out that default setting by going to linear, and start making my adjustments myself to this tone curve. Now the first thing I do is pick a point up here which represents the bright point parts of the image, these tones here in the trees. How bright do I want them to be? I could go that way. That's way too much, obviously, isn't it? If I just go to the right, they start to become a grey. As they are, they're about as bright as I want them to be. So I'm going to peg that there, and now introduce that S curve to give me the contrast I need. The bright points are remaining as bright as they were, but I'm darkening the blacks quite radically. Now the thing is, with infrared, pictures, you always find yourself making much more extreme adjustments than you would do normally. I think that's true essentially of all black and white work, but particularly with infrared. I'd never really dream of putting such an extreme S-shaped tone curve into a color image. Very, very rarely. The results would look pretty gruesome. But in this case, it's necessary. So I'm pretty pleased with that. It's still just a bit too, the overall image is just a bit too bright, but nevertheless the contrast is starting to look about right. So I'm just going to keep it there for the moment. Now, we've talked about these sliders before and the danger of them. Clarity, which introduces local contrast, is generally speaking a slider that I'm very wary of. I don't like it for my color work. I hardly ever use it. But with black and white it can be of use. If we start to bring in a bit of clarity, you see it's adjusting local contrast. It's making essentially blacks blacker and whites whiter across a very narrow range. Now I'm going to put about 20 in, just under, come back a touch, round about there. It's made the image too bright again. Now instead of going back to the tone curve and tweaking that, I'm actually going to use the exposure slider here to now pull the image back to the overall density that I want. I'd say somewhere around about there is looking still a touch too bright. Let's go back about there, I'd say. What do you reckon? It's coming to me. We're not quite finished yet, really. I'm fairly happy with this region of the image. The contrast is good. Those trees stand out well against the darkness of the moor behind. But I'm looking at two areas of the picture, the sky and this bottom margin of the frame, which I find too bright down here, and the sky just looks a little bit flat. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the graduated filter, and I'm just going to first of all control my sort of severity of the gradation. Something like about that will work well. Pull that down here. Now we normally think of using grad filters to introduce a bit of density in the sky. We know we cannot do that if the information is burnt out in the first place. It's all there, but instead of controlling the actual darkness of the picture using the exposure slider, I'm going to actually affect the contrast using this contrast slider. And if I bring it quite a way to the right, as I said, you do things to extremes with black and white and infrared work, and that has really made quite a difference to the sky. So I'm going to click on done there, and the next thing I want to do is look at this bottom area of the frame here, which I find myself it's just too bright. So I'm now going to use the adjustment brush here, and here you can see the size of the brush, the control here. I can go up to that size. You need to pick a size which is in relation to the size of the area of the image that you're working on. Okay, so I'm just going to move it across this image here, this part of the image here, right, comme ça. And now if I go to my exposure slider and move that down, you can see it's darkening down here the area that I used the adjustment brush on, and that's good. It was just a bit too bright on the edge of the frame. I don't like bright areas right on the frame margin, so I've darkened it down quite a bit, and I'm also going to add contrast there. And now that really has transformed the image from where we started. I'm quite happy with that. So at this stage, what would I do? I'd go and I would select some sharpening. As usual, I'm using Lightroom's default setting to start with. Well, let's just select Done for my adjustment brush, forgot to do that. Now I select Sharpen, and I go down here and I'm going to dial in some masking. So I hold down Alt and I move this to the right. The masking is the black area, and that's telling me where no sharpening is going to be applied. We only need to apply sharpening to the areas of the image where there are definite edges to sharpen. And for example, in the sky, that's not the case. So that's quite a bit of masking I've put on. And there, I'm pretty much done with that picture. And that works through the workflow of infrared. And if I just select the image next to it, or if I go back here and look at the start and the end, you can see what a pretty radical transformation that is. I'm happy with that shot, and at this stage I would export it. So that's infrared post-production. Thank you for your attention, and we'll see you next month.